supposed to be provocative on this panel here, and one of the hard things about being on one of the final panels of the day and being one of the final speakers on one of the final panels of the day is all the provocative things have been said, I think. I'm astonished by all the provocations that we heard earlier. It was really great stuff. So I guess I'll try to start with this provocation, which is my work is based on sort of the four fault lines of the internet age and information policy of copyright, cybersecurity, privacy, and child safety, or online free speech. And in each of these areas, we are faced with an interesting dilemma, which is that the greatest blessing of the information age and life in the information age is also its greatest curse, which is information wants to be free. You've all heard that phrase and probably thought about it, and there's always a sort of selective morality around that phrase. We like information wanting to be free when it's something that we think needs to be free and out there. And then there's the times when there's information that we don't want to get out there and does anyway, but we don't want that information to be free. But the reality is that this is sort of the equivalent of an iron law of the information age, that the information, if it can get out, will get out. And we face all these challenges in these four areas of what are we going to do about it. And my own personal work has been, over the last dozen years or so, primarily focused on that with regards to online safety and child protection issues. Because I'm a big believer in the First Amendment and freedom of speech. I spent a lifetime talking about those issues and advocating on those issues, filing in courts and everything else. And then the first of my two children was born. And I realized, boy, I really need to start thinking about putting my money where my mouth is and talking about how to balance out these concerns about child safety alongside free speech. And so I did a lot of writing on that. It produced a paper that went from a 20-page paper to a 220-page booklet on parental controls and online child protection, a survey of tools and methods. Horribly boring title, but hey, very descriptive. And it basically tried to outline sort of ways that tools and methods and strategies that parents could utilize to solve these hard questions. And then I was on 3 of the 6 major online safety task forces that met from 1999 to 2010, trying to put together reports that consolidated all the best thinking on the issue of online child protection, child safety, and freedom of speech. And the 2 key lessons, I think, that came out of all that work, I think are very much applicable to the field of privacy and security policy, which is that first and foremost, silver bullet solutions don't work. That trying to impose top-down, centralized, centrally directed solutions on fast-moving, highly evolving space like the internet and information technology is very, very difficult, probably going to be doomed to fail. So you look at experiments we've had in sort of centralized filtering solutions and proposals like mandatory age verification online, things like this. These are all very well-intentioned policies and ideas. Some of them have been, we've tried to put in place, others have been preempted by First Amendment or free speech challenges. But the reality is that we spent a lot of time and a lot of resources trying to make those sorts of top-down solutions work to solve what were very serious and legitimate concerns about access to objectionable content online, whether it be pornography, violent material, hate speech, you name it. The second lesson that came out of that is that all roads lead back to education. Education, media literacy, digital citizenship, online etiquette or netiquette, as some people call it. And there's a wonderful body of literature that's developed after we had all these fights about how can we control information. What's our information control solution for pornography or hate speech or violence? And finally, people said, enough. We need to start thinking far more seriously about how to educate our kids, and about how to talk to our kids in an open, understanding, and loving fashion about the realities of the world, including the distasteful bits. And that includes that's not just for the purpose of stopping them from seeing certain things or doing certain things. It's also to encourage them about proper behaviors towards others. I think all of these lessons are more broadly applicable in the field of privacy. And I think we've not done enough work so far thinking through how we should educate the next generation and even ourselves to some extent, because privacy is even a more broadly shared value in some ways than online safety, because not everybody has a kid, of course. Privacy is something I think a lot of us are concerned about, but in different ways. But what we need is not, again, a one-size-fits-all single silver bullet solution. What we instead need is diverse solutions for a diverse citizenry. We need to think about sort of layered approaches to tackling this problem. And in my work on online safety, I spent chapter after chapter, going through all these different strategies, all these different tools. But I kept getting drawn back to the fact that again and again, there was no substitute for teaching kids to think with the most important filter of all, which is the filter between their brains, between their ears, their brain. And that is really something that I think we still haven't thought through enough in the field of privacy policy. Now we're starting to come around, but we still spend a lot of time in government reports, in panels and discussions, thinking about, well, how do we make do not track work? How do we make this cookie blocking technology work? What do we do to impose, FIPS in this area? Or what does privacy by design look like here? Again, as far as these efforts go, they're all well-intentioned, and some of them I think could still yield some possible benefits. But I think at the end of the day, we go back to the reality that indeed information wants to be free, and in many ways it's going to get out there. I think that's particularly the case because we sort of ain't seen nothing yet in terms of problems with privacy in the information age. We could be approaching an age where we'll be living in sort of a post-FIPS world soon enough, and maybe even a post-privacy by design world because of the rise of things like the Internet of Things and unmanned autonomous or aerial vehicles or commercial drones. It's going to be very hard in that world to even know how we will apply traditional FIPS policies and principles or even privacy by design. We're going to need to move to something more akin to privacy on the fly. People say, well, isn't that sort of making it up as we go along? Yeah, it is. We're learning the lessons as we go about what works. And a big part of what we do is just educating consumers, users, and many others, including especially our kids, about proper uses. So I wrote a piece this week on the IAPP blog about this, basically asking the question, can we adapt to the Internet of Things? Because I think it really does challenge all these assumptions and sort of the toolbox that we've already established here to deal with a lot of these problems. And again, it comes back to the idea of figuring out how we can structure education, literacy, digital citizenship lessons for all ages, all walks of life, to think about how to utilize these technologies. I'm also a big believer in the power of social norms to change things for the better. I mean, you think about previous technologies that have come along that have been hugely socially disruptive. I mean, all of you know examples of the camera, of course. I mean, the camera is massively disruptive, but so is the telephone. And there are many other technologies that came along that we did not necessarily have a clear playbook for how to deal with them. Laws were slow to catch up, and social norms had to take over and fill those gaps. Cameras, for example, could be used right now in any locker room the same way Google Glass could. But I don't know about you, but when I go to my gym, there's a sign that says, no pulling out cell phones in this locker room. And everybody honors it. It's not to say that's perfect, but it's a social norm that's evolved, sort of a self-regulatory norm. We need more things like that. There can even be social conventions. I don't know how many of you have heard of the convention of phone stacking, where you go to a bar to have some drinks with friends or go to have dinner with friends, and everybody has to stack their phones on top of each other in the middle of the table, and the first person to touch their phone during the meal of the drinks has to buy the whole round or the whole dinner. I mean, that's not widely caught on yet, but I've seen people do that in D.C. quite a bit, in Washington, D.C., and it's one of these social conventions or norms that sort of spontaneously came about from the bottom up. So, again, my focus here is to try to get you to think about how we can move away from the idea of the solution and to the solutions plural. And I get very frustrated, both in the child safety context and the privacy context, when I see a lot of smart people putting all their energy and resources into trying to find the solution to these problems. Because instead, we're going to have to go with a layered approach. A bottom-up, sort of organic, dynamic approach, sort of, again, privacy on the fly or privacy by evolving social norms and social conventions, however we want to think about it. Does not mean that there's no role for law. Absolutely not. Law needs to play a role here at the margins because there are going to be some harms that we're going to have to address. And in each of the areas that I discussed before, the four main fault lines of the information age, copyright, security, privacy, child safety, there are some harms that rise to the level of being so serious that that's where we need to devote all our time and energy into saying, if we're going to have a centralized solution, here it is. For example, in child safety, we need to really have strong top-down solutions for things like online child pornography. And we do. We put a lot of our energy into solving the information control problem there. It doesn't always work perfectly, but that's where we've decided, like, we've got to deal with that harm. We're sort of doing that in the world of privacy with regards to health and financial information. Again, it's not perfect, but we've targeted those harms and says, yeah, here's where we can agree. We have to bring in the law. We have to find a way to make sort of a centralized solution work. Even then, it's going to be hard. But I guess what I want to leave you with is the idea that the approach that I've suggested, again, the bottom-up, organic sort of approach, privacy on the fly, if you will, is the one we're going to have to get to eventually anyway. It's the one we got to in these other areas that I mentioned, especially in child safety. And every one of those task forces that met, and the ones that I was on, go back and read the reports. One wonderful report done by the Harvard Berkman Center, I was on that task force. One done by Common Sense Media that I was on. Another one done by the US government, Department of Commerce, called the Online Safety Technology Working Group. And they all came back to the centrality of education, media literacy, digital citizenship as the ultimate solution to these hard questions in the information age. So I'll leave you with that. Sorry I wasn't any more provocative than that, but that's the best I've got. Thanks.